New video, folks. New video. If you're a Bible believer, do not watch this video. This video is not for you. This is about the Sumerian tablets and what's going on with the religious world. It's all a lie. Yo, yo, yo! Here we go! This new religion, it's inside you because you're Mandela affected. We all are starseeds. This is a Penguinati crew production. This is fair use. This is copyright edition for Sagittarius Armed Society. We're not breaking any rules.
This is Special Report. This is Special Report.
I've been a preacher for more than 30 years. I've studied and taught through the book of Genesis many, many times in churches all around the world, and I've trained pastors in the skills of interpreting texts.
The truth sounds like hate to those who hate to hear the truth. So if you want lies, this is not the channel for you. You might want to go look at Stavely, EYA, and John. You can follow them for lies. There are fake preachers, and they say there are experts on the Bible changes, and that's a lie. Listen to Paul Wallace. His YouTube channel is The Fifth Kind. He has 3 books. He's an Amazon bestseller. He is also a Bible scholar. He knows what he's talking about.
Now there's a broad consensus among biblical scholars that the current version of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, was edited or redacted sometime in the 6th century BCE. He's also telling the reader this is not the original version. Originally, they were Elohim stories. Genesis uses 2 words for God. One is Elohim and one is Yahweh. When you look at its component parts, the word Elohim means the powers or the powerful ones. Now, when you read Genesis translating the word that way, the texts change and suddenly line up with the Sumerian texts. I've been a preacher for more than 30 years. I've studied and taught through the book of Genesis many, many times in churches all around the world, and I've trained pastors in the skills of interpreting texts. So I've long known about this anomalous word. Well, finally, I allowed myself the time to sit down and really drill into what was going on. Genesis uses 2 words for God. One is Elohim and one is Yahweh or Jehovah. Now, Yahweh is the holy name given to Moses in a time centuries or millennia after all the action described in the stories of beginnings. So the fact that the word Yahweh appears in those much older stories, that clues us that we're not reading the original version of the stories. The stories are being retold by someone after the time of Moses. Now there's a broad consensus among biblical scholars that the current version of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, was edited or redacted sometime in the 6th century BCE, and that the redactor, by putting the name Yahweh into these older stories, the stories that Abraham and Sarah had brought with them, was telling the reader to regard them as God's stories. By using the later name, he's also telling the reader this is not the original version. Originally, they were Elohim stories. Now, that word Elohim is a very interesting word because it's a plural form word. It often exhibits plural behaviors. Let us make the humans to look like one of us. We don't want them to become too much like one of us, etc. The word Elohim often takes plural verb forms. It's sometimes translated as God, but in other places it gets translated as false gods, or demons, or angels, or chieftains, or land barons. So why this enormous elasticity in the word's meaning? Well, again, we have to go back to the roots of the word and ask, why is it used that way? And why does it behave like a plural? When you look at its component parts, the word Elohim means the powers or the powerful ones. Now, when you read Genesis translating the word that way, the texts change and suddenly line up with the Sumerian texts. And one by one, they confirm each other's stories. And it's very clear they're not stories about gods. They're stories about the powerful ones in the Bible and the sky people, the Anunnaki, in the Sumerian tablets.
The Sumerian cuneiforms also named their first human king, Gilgamesh.
Okay, folks, it's getting good. This is a Sumerian god, which is, I believe, a hybrid, a human hybrid, mixed in with the Anunnaki. And this is where the stories come from. And the G stands for the symbol of these dark forces. And you're going to learn about the G and who's running this planet.
To be more accurate, Gilgamesh is a transition king, a hybrid of human and Anunnaki.
DNA test. We can now test Sumerian royalty to confirm whether it was entirely human. Well, one obvious possibility is by DNA testing. So if Gilgamesh really was a human Anunnaki hybrid, then all we have to do is find the royal tomb and DNA test him. Well, I believe that's exactly what happened in Iraq in 2003. A team went in protected by American troops at the beginning of the 2003 Iraq invasion and found Gilgamesh's tomb. Fassbinder spoke to the BBC.
This is an article from the BBC News about the Gilgamesh tomb that they found in 2003.
You see, you can go on his website, you can read all about it. Now, the official story is that having located the probable tomb site 16 years ago, we decided not to investigate any further. What Nathaniel Schmidt had done wrong was read the Sumerian and Babylonian and Assyrian texts and notice that they were full of fascinating parallels, stories that occurred there that were uncannily similar to all the stories of beginnings of the Bible. Stories like Adam and Eve, the fall, Cain and Abel, the flood, the limiting of human life, the event at the Tower of Babel. And Schmidt's work demonstrated that the Sumerian accounts and those that followed it from nearly 6,000 years ago were in all probability the source of all those familiar biblical stories. And so it shouldn't be a surprise that in the Bible we have a summary version of all these stories that pepper the Sumerian, Babylonian, and Assyrian texts. The problem and the shock horror is that the original versions, the Sumerian versions of these stories, make no mention of God at all. In the Sumerian originals, these are stories of our ancestors' contact with another species, a species called the Anunnaki.
The cuneiform tablets which had fascinated Nathaniel Schmidt were first unearthed in the 1500s as colonial powers began to excavate the ancient sites of Mesopotamia. Over the decades that followed, some 200,000 clay tablets were uncovered. The tablets were adorned with strange etchings or glyphs made when the clay was soft. Scholars of the day were divided as to the meanings of these markings. Some believed the glyphs to be an unknown written language. Others refused to accept this, since the tablets appeared to predate any known language. They presumed the markings to be no more than decoration. And so the tablets were archived, their secrets locked away for 3 centuries. Until, in 1835, Henry Rawlinson arrived in southwestern Iran.
Rawlinson was a military man. He was employed by the East India Tea Company, and he was in Iran helping the Shah of Iran to train his troops. In fact, Rawlinson's presence in Iran wasn't part of a quid pro quo for trading rights. He was there for access to the district of Behistun. He wanted to find the Behistun inscription.
The Behistun inscription was an ancient royal proclamation carved into a cliff face.
Nathaniel Schmidt was in good company. He was one of a small number who began confronting us with this new layer of our history. His work continued to argue that the cuneiforms reveal that our earliest histories are not about God. They are about our prehistoric contact with the Anunnaki.
In the 20th century, the writer Zecharia Sitchin began poring over the cuneiform texts. He highlighted the clear implications of the Sumerian stories, that the Anunnaki. Sitchin argued the word Anunnaki means those who came from the heavens to earth, a phrase that made clear their extraterrestrial origin.
See, if you look at the etymology of the word, at its root meanings, look at the component parts, you have Anu, which means heavens, Ki, which means earth. Anunnaki are those who came from the heavens to the earth. You can follow the logic. So these Anunnaki are from the heavens. They're sky people.
Why would an extraterrestrial species be interested in governing a human population on planet Earth? Why would advanced beings from another planet have any interest in interfering with human evolution?
Now, in the Sumerian version of these stories, it's the senior Anunnaki Enlil who actions and pushes all these negative agendas that are somewhat hostile to human beings. But there is another agenda in the Anunnaki community. There is a figure called Enki, who appears to be the leader of the Earth Project, and he is junior to Enlil. He's described as Enlil's brother. So in the Sumerian story, humanity gets caught in the crossfire of these mysterious beings in conflict. A number of our so-called creation myths begin with a rehabilitation of a devastated and flooded planet, shrouded in darkness. And that arrival is a positive interaction with this other species because they begin to nurture life on the planet. They nurture animal life, they nurture human life. Then later in the Sumerian account, it's Enki, the one who's in charge of the Earth Project, who wants to upgrade human beings for a more enjoyable, a better, a more conscious kind of life. And there's a conflict between Enlil and Enki over whether that should happen. Enlil, the CEO, does not want that. And so Enki breaks ranks to achieve that upgrade for us. When Enlil wants to destroy the human experiment by devastating the planet, again, it's Enki who seeks out a favored family, the family of Artrahasis, aka Ziusudra, aka Utnapishtim, aka Noah, and gives him instructions as to how to construct an escape pod for his family and his farm so they can reboot the project. So I think we can say the Anunnaki presence is a mixed bag for humanity. We're really caught in the crossfires of this conflict among a species who are ambivalent about the progress of human society. There is oppression and slavery in the Anunnaki narrative, but there's also a concern for human welfare and a nurturing of human beings. So it's a mixed story.
Today's reports of ET contact reflect a similar range of agendas, some harmful, some indifferent, and some nurturing. Are these contemporary experiences connected with the Anunnaki narratives, or are people today experiencing something or someone different? What difference does the Anunnaki narrative make to human beings today? If you and I are part primate and part Anunnaki, how does that help us? And are the Anunnaki still present, or are we now our own masters? Does the Anunnaki narrative give us an explanation of our original separation from all other animal forms on planet Earth, but leave us with no word about our future?
My hope is focused not so much on external interventions as on our own capabilities. Our ancestral narratives all speak of higher consciousness being downgraded in our prehistoric past. And to my mind, that raises the possibility that our cognitive abilities can be upgraded and our consciousness can be heightened. Our mythologies speak of our perceptual field being limited. Now, to my mind, that suggests we might be able to expand it. The Anunnaki narrative speaks of us laboring for superiors, and you can see that we're hardwired to do that. But what if we were able to break down that programming and start working for one another instead of those above us? What if we de-engineered all our neurological slave settings and allowed ourselves to live freer, less fearful lives? What would that look like? Many of the cultures that have curated these stories of beginnings have also curated modalities, methods that are designed to reawaken a higher state of consciousness. So ancient Greek culture, which had this narrative, also had the modality of a kaikion ritual. Kaikion was a kind of tea ritual aimed at heightening the person's state of consciousness. In Mesoamerica, we find another tea ceremony with exactly the same purpose. If we go to indigenous Australia or to Native America, we find smoke and smoking ceremonies and similar activities in the ancient Indian cultures that produced the Vedas. Eastern monastic traditions have disciplines of stillness and conscious breathing. And in my experience, they really do have perches in terms of altering our state of consciousness and heightening our abilities for a better human experience.
If the Anunnaki stories represent our true origins as a species, and human beings are part earthling and part higher being, what does that mean for our potential as human beings today? Are we bound to the contracts of employment, systems of money and banking, and the tyranny of hours, minutes, and seconds, first taught to the ancient Sumerians more than 5,000 years ago? Or are other ways open to us as human beings? Might higher forms of consciousness help us achieve a new freedom from the legacy of our enslaved past and provide a pathway to a better human experience?
Thank you for watching. This is a White Sun production.